The world runs on standards. Planes land using the same protocols no matter where you are. Banking systems talk to each other seamlessly. GPS coordinates mean the same thing on every continent. The internet hums along on a shared set of technical rules. But when it comes to language, no such luck. There's no universal standard in sight. To understand why, we need to wind the clock back about 60 to 70,000 years. Back then, Homo sapiens lived in small bands, think 30 to 50 people, tops. These were tight-knit little communities that could go months, even years, without ever crossing paths with another group. They were constantly on the move, following food and water, covering hundreds of kilometers over the course of a single generation. Some people followed the Indian Ocean coastline, and honestly, it made sense. The sea kept them fed, and the shore gave them a natural path to follow. Others pushed through the Middle East and made their way into Europe. Some ended up in Australia surprisingly early. The Americas came much later. People crossed through Barinia back when sea levels were low enough to walk between continents. As groups spread further apart, contact between them faded away, sometimes for thousands of years. And when you stopped talking to your neighbors, your language stopped standing still. A few hundred years of that, and the language would be barely recognizable, and without writing, nothing pinned it down. There was no correct version to go back to, and that's how language families gradually came to be. Think of them as one big family tree. There's a common ancestor, a proto-language, and from it, branches spread out, each one eventually becoming its own distinct language. Proto-indo-european, spoken several thousand years ago somewhere out on the steppes north of the Black Sea, went on to spawn hundreds of languages. Latin, Sanskrit, Greek, the Germanic languages, the Slavic ones, they all trace back to it. Latin itself once stretched across the entire Roman Empire, from Britain all the way to Syria, binding it all together. But when the empire collapsed, soldiers, merchants, and ordinary people all started speaking their own way. A few centuries of that, and vulgar Latin, the everyday spoken version, had quietly split into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. The word for language in Italian is lingua. In French, it's langue. In Spanish, lengua. Same root, different sounds, like cousins who grew up in different countries but still share a family resemblance. Arabic spread alongside the Caliphate, stretching from Spain all the way to Central Asia. But today's dialects have drifted so far apart that a Moroccan and an Iraqi might actually switch to formal written Arabic just to get through a conversation. And even English, which dominates science, business, and the internet, keeps reinventing itself. Indian English, Nigerian English, Singaporean English. Language also shapes itself around the environment people live in. Inuit languages have a remarkable number of ways to describe snow and ice. Not just snow as a general thing, but specific words for powder snow, hard-packed crust, ice that creaks underfoot, ice that'll hold your weight. For someone navigating the Arctic, that distinction isn't just interesting. It could mean the difference between a safe route and a fatal one. Some Aboriginal Australian languages don't use left and right at all. Instead, everything is described in terms of compass directions: north, south, east, west. Speakers always know which way they're facing, almost instinctively. And studies suggest they tend to navigate space more accurately than most Europeans. The idea of a single shared language has followed humanity for thousands of years. The book of Genesis tells the story of the Tower of Babel. After the flood, people spoke one language and understood each other without any need for translation. They settled on a plain in Shinar and decided to build a city and a tower reaching up to the heavens to make a name for themselves and keep from scattering across the earth. The text puts it plainly: one people, one language, and look what they've already started. Nothing will be out of their reach. And it's precisely that unity that triggers divine intervention. God comes down to see the city and the tower, and decides to mix up their languages so that people can no longer understand one another. The languages get scrambled. People can't coordinate anymore, and the construction grinds to a halt. The city gets named Babylon, from the word for confusion. and humanity scatters across the earth. A similar idea turns up in Sumerian texts too. The god Enki splits humanity's languages to stop people from becoming one unstoppable force, to preserve the cosmic order before it gets thrown out of balance. In the 19th century, a doctor named Ludwig Zamenhof set out to actually do something about it. He'd grown up in Białystok, a city where different communities lived side by side and ethnic tensions were a fact of daily life. His thinking was simple. A neutral language with straightforward grammar could take the edge off hostility between people. The language he created was Esperanto, and it caught on quickly. Newspapers, novels, international congresses. In the 1920s, it was even put forward to the League of Nations as an official international language. But without backing from the major powers, it stayed what it's always been, a passionate movement run on enthusiasm. And yet the idea never goes away. It keeps turning up in culture again and again. Klingon from Star Trek, Dothraki from Game of Thrones, Tolkien's Elvish languages, they're all proof of how deeply the idea of building an entirely new linguistic world captures the imagination. Now, let's imagine a world where humanity actually did end up speaking one language. Christopher Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492 and went straight into talks with local leaders. In reality, those first contacts ran on gestures, guesswork, and the occasional interpreter. In a one-language world, that barrier simply isn't there. Agreements get made faster. Isaac Newton publishes Principia Mathematica. In reality, scholars read Latin, translated, and wrote letters back and forth for years. In a one-language world, his equations are being debated across the globe almost immediately. Discoveries travel faster, science compounds quicker. Then there's the Second World War. And here's where it gets interesting. The Allies actually used linguistic differences as a security tool. The US military recruited native Navajo speakers to transmit sensitive messages because the language was so obscure to outsiders that the enemy simply couldn't crack it. A living, breathing code. In a one-language world, that protection vanishes entirely. Any intercepted message is instantly readable by anyone. A shared language speeds up coordination, but it quietly removes some very useful natural barriers. Oops. So what might a 21st century universal language actually look like? Almost certainly not Latin, definitely not Mandarin. It would be digital. It would have taken shape where we spend most of our time, online. Tenses would be stripped right back. No 10 forms of the past, just one marker for past, one for future. Clean and simple. But honestly, the alphabet might not even be the point anymore, because this language already partly exists. Like, repost, DM, lol, OK, emoji. A universal language of the future might run on 500 words and 200 pictograms, and we'd get along just fine. We're already communicating in a kind of semi-iconographic way, actually reverting to something ancient. A system where an image carries emotion faster than a sentence ever could. An emoji replaces tone of voice. A reaction replaces a paragraph. A GIF replaces an explanation. Online slang has a lifespan of a few years, then disappears. Every new platform grows its own dialect. Even if a universal language were born on the internet, it wouldn't stay universal for long, which is why you should probably learn 2 languages, 3, ideally. Why? From a neuroscience perspective, bilingualism is essentially a constant workout for your brain's control systems. When you know 2 languages, your brain keeps both active at the same time, even when you're only using one. Every time you go to say something, your brain has to quietly suppress the other language to get the right word out. That trains your inhibition mechanisms, your attention, and your ability to make fast choices. Neuroimaging studies show that bilingual people have more active regions tied to executive function. They build up what's called cognitive reserve, a kind of resilience in the neural networks. And that's thought to be why, on average, symptoms of dementia appear 4 to 5 years later in bilingual people than in monolingual ones. A world with one language would be more convenient, but probably less flexible, less adaptable. Maybe humanity held on to all this diversity for a reason. Because as long as different languages exist, different ways of thinking exist, and as long as different ways of thinking exist, so does progress.